All right. Hello, welcome. My name is Jocelyn Williams, and I am the founder and director of Neurolly Solutions, and it is my honor and privilege to be with you here this evening. Tonight's event is called the Indy Birth Alliance Education Series. I just want to share with you our agenda for tonight. Our agenda is that we'll do a little introduction about the Indy Birth Alliance. Then we will have a guest speaker. After our guest speaker, we will talk about neurodevelopmental movement. And then from there, we will have a question and answer period. Our goal is to be all wrapped up by 9 o'clock because we know that you have loved ones to get to. So let's go ahead and officially begin with just an introduction and an explanation of the IBA. So the IBA is known as the Indy Birth Alliance, and we are a group of birth professionals empowering a healthy birth community through support, service, education, and advocacy. Each Monday night at 8 p.m., we will be hosting our summer series called the Indy Birth Alliance Education Series. We're going to be, we invite you to join us each week as we host a variety of guest speakers that will talk about birth and infant-related topics such as breastfeeding, doula services, fertility coaching, and go ahead and mute your, we're gonna go ahead, take a minute to mute anybody who's not muted. Okay, there we go. Breastfeeding, doula services, fertility coaching, pelvic floor therapy, so important, postpartum care. We talked about spinning babies already. Tonight we're going to talk about VBAC. We'll also dive into the infant developmental sequence and so much more. Tonight's topic, the title is VBAC, Vaginal Birth After Cesarean. And our topic is, how can you plan for a successful VBAC? Our guest speaker is Julie Pichon. She's a CD DONA CLS. Julie is a wife, mom of 4 sons, and a Grammy of 7. She works as a childbirth educator, a birth doula, and lactation specialist. Her business, Birth by Design, offers education and training for birth and breastfeeding. Currently, over 1/3 of her clients are planning a TOLAC, which stands for Trial of Labor After Cesarean. Over 68% of all her TOLAC clients in the last 20+ years have been able to achieve a VBAC. She's going to speak with us tonight. I'm excited to learn from her, but I also want to direct you to her website. So her website is www.birthbydesign.com, and we'll get that in the chat box here in just a minute. And so tonight, Julie is going to share with us her tips on planning a successful TOLAC. Okay, TOLAC. Okay, so Julie, let's go ahead and dive in. First of all, what is a TOLAC? What is a VBAC? And what is the difference between a TOLAC and a VBAC? Oh, we're going to have you.
Now can you hear me? All right, I didn't know I was muted. So I am so happy to be here. I'm so happy to talk about one of my favorite subjects. And so a TOLAC is a trial of labor after cesarean. And a TOLAC just means that a woman is planning to labor and let her body have an opportunity to have a vaginal birth after she's had at least 1 or more cesarean sections. A VBAC is a vaginal birth after cesarean. So that's once she's completed that, had that vaginal birth, then that process is called a VBAC. We use those interchangeably sometimes, but it's nice to know the difference.
Awesome. Now, why should a client, or let's say if I was expecting, I'm not, I have 5 kids, so I'm done. But um, why would one consider a TOLAC?
There are just so many reasons, and a lot of those are individual to the women and how their cesarean birth has affected them. And so for some women, it's an emotional need to want to have a vaginal birth. I really believe that it's built into women to want to vaginally birth their babies. And so I hear that so often, that they just have this deep desire to accomplish that. So sometimes it's that, it's just a desire. It's
Hmm.
often because of health reasons. It is really safer in the long run to avoid another major abdominal surgery. So a lot of women will want to avoid that because they don't want to have the recovery. They don't want to have the risks that go along with that, and the risks that continue as you have multiple major abdominal surgeries. The risks exponentially get higher and higher.
Hmm.
So that can be another reason that they really would be interested in a TOLAC. Another reason might be that they have some trauma or some pain from their first birth. And sometimes, maybe even often, when a woman's had a cesarean, there was some disappointment in that, some difficulty in that labor. Things probably didn't go the way she expected them to go. And so that could range anywhere from disappointment on one end to really PTSD and
Hmm.
serious issues on the other end. And so many times women look at a VBAC or TOLAC as a means of healing from their previous birth. So those are just a few of the reasons.
Okay. Um, what will help a mom, okay, an expecting mom, have a successful VBAC?
Well, that's a really good question. And this is something that I cover every time I talk to a potential client who's thinking about a VBAC, because I want her to have an idea of what will really help her. There's a whole lot of things that can help, but the things that I focus on is the first is just really wanting it.
Hmm.
They need to desire to accomplish it. They need to feel safe in that aspect of, as far as finding their care and going through with the TOLAC. They need to feel safe in that, but they have to really want it, because in our medical society, it is actually a little bit of work, and sometimes a lot of work, to get to a VBAC birth. There's a lot of things to navigate and negotiate, and so just having the desire and the confidence to do it makes a huge difference. And a lot of times at the beginning of the process, the desire is there, but the confidence is still kind of
Hmm.
lacking. And so part of what I do as a birth doula is helping build that confidence by education. And I really think education helps build the confidence, plus talking about their previous birth experience and how that might have affected them. And sometimes we have a lot of things to unpack and talk through. Sometimes I refer women to counseling or therapy to work through that if it's more than we can talk about. So
Hmm.
wanting it is number one. Number two is having a supportive caregiver and place of birth. And that's vitally important. We're going to talk more about the caregiver in a few minutes. But actually, research shows that the place of birth, so the hospital setting, birth center, home, whatever, the place of birth is the number one factor for a woman to have a successful VBAC, not even the provider. So the atmosphere of the place of birth makes a huge difference. So I talk to women about selecting a caregiver that's going to be VBAC supportive, and a place of birth where they have a lower C-section rate, where they have, where they do allow VBACs to happen. And so that makes a big difference, is the caregiver and the place of birth. The other thing that makes a huge difference for the woman is going into labor on her own. It is possible to induce a VBAC if it's necessary, but the most successful route is usually going to be giving her body time to go into labor on its own. The fourth is having a doula. And I always say, it doesn't have to be me. You don't have to hire me. But if you want to have a TOLAC, I highly recommend that you hire a doula, because that's going to increase your odds of success. And the research really shows that. And then the fifth thing is to labor with mobility, with movement, with positioning, with the best baby positioning and mom positioning we can possibly use, and avoiding the epidural. So an epidural can be a useful tool, but if we can either avoid it altogether or postpone it until when labor is very active and moving, then it's less likely to affect her ability to have a successful VBAC. So those are the 5 things that I think really makes a difference. There's some other things that can be really important. One of them is chiropractic care. I think that makes a huge difference. And so there are other, other things that we can definitely talk about. But I think those are the 5 that certainly help women.
Okay. So you touched on the care provider a little bit just a few moments ago. How would an expecting mama know if her care provider is VBAC tolerant or VBAC supportive? How would she know that?
That's a great question, because women often don't understand that. They're looking for encouragement, and if they get the little tiny bit of encouragement from their care provider, they say, oh, they're going to support me and they're going to be right behind me. And sometimes that's not true. So we have 3 categories, really. There's the VBAC unsupportive caregiver. And that's the one, that says, I won't allow you to have a VBAC, or our hospital won't allow you to do that, or we don't do trial of labors after cesarean. So that one obviously is completely out. We do not want that care provider. The next category is the VBAC tolerant. So some of the things you might hear from them would be, you need to deliver your baby by 39 or 40 weeks to have a successful VBAC. That I will not induce you ever. If you don't go into labor on your own, you must have a repeat C-section by X week, 40 weeks, 39 weeks even. They also talk a lot about your odds of success based on a VBAC calculator. And there's a tool out there called the VBAC calculator, which you can Google, and it shows what your odds are based on a number of things. And those things may or may not affect your particular odds of being successful. They also suggest that your baby's too large early on, or they talk about a large baby, or they talk about shoulder dystocia, even before there's any signs that you could have a large baby or that your baby is bigger than average. This doctor might comment on your small hips, your small pelvis, your small stature, and suggest that you might not be able to birth. They also might require the epidural placement just in case. So they want every woman having a TOLAC to have an epidural, so that if they have an emergency, they can go right to the OR and do a C-section. They don't go over the risks of repeat C-sections. And the risks of repeat C-sections are huge. I have this little visual I use, and it talks about the risk of the first C-section. And then it talks about the risks of the first VBAC, second VBAC, and third VBAC. So as you see those risks, which I'm not going to do a bunch of numbers, but the risks go down. So as you have more VBACs, the risks are down here. The risks of the first C-section is up here, because the risks of C-section are actually higher for mom than a vaginal birth. The risk of the second C-section is much more, and a third or fourth C-section is exponentially more. In fact, the risk of adhesions at that point is 42%, and adhesions can lead to hysterectomy. The risk of major complications is 12%. So, I mean, they just go up really, really high. So doctors often talk about, or caregivers talk about, the risk of VBAC, of uterine rupture, which is the main risk that you hear people think about or talk about. But they don't talk about the risk of repeat C-sections. So I always make sure and point out to a woman that if she is having a baby after a cesarean, be it one or more, then she has a risk factor, whether she has a repeat cesarean or a vaginal birth. She is higher risk. So because women, often it's painted for women that there's no risk to have a repeat C-section, but there's a lot of risk to have a vaginal birth after that C-section. So if a doctor doesn't talk about the risks of repeat C-section, but only the risks of the VBAC, that's a clue. Also, if they work in a group, an on-call group, and the other providers might not be supportive, that's a red flag, because if they work in a group and you don't get your doctor, then you might have somebody that says, no, I won't do a labor. We need to do a repeat C-section if you show up in labor, or just manage it differently than the caregiver you're working with. So those are some of those signs of the tolerant, the VBAC tolerant. The VBAC supportive caregiver is not going to give time limits for labor, except for what ACOG already says. And ACOG, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, say that a baby should be born by 42 weeks, that after 42 weeks, the risk of staying pregnant are usually higher than the risks of waiting for the baby. And so that's a reasonable limit for a healthy mom and baby. They also, a supportive caregiver will induce gently if it's necessary. And even though I said earlier that, avoiding induction will help with success, also, sometimes a gentle induction will ensure success. So that gives a woman more options if she gets to that road and she's 41 and a half weeks pregnant, hasn't had a baby. And so that could possibly be an option for her. We also want to see a caregiver that will go over her unique birth history, because every woman has one. And we want them to treat that woman uniquely and look at that. And also a caregiver that knows that bigger babies can be born vaginally, even to small women. It's not about what you look like or how big your hips look from the outside. It's really more about your bone structure, your baby's position in the pelvis. Encourage movement and being upright in labor, especially in early and active labor. So also that this care provider will go over the risks of VBAC and repeat C-section, so that the mom has a real knowledge of what those risks look like. And so the biggest risk, like I said, of VBAC that most people are thinking about is uterine rupture. And the risks of that are very, very small. Around 0.4% of a woman having a TOLAC, a trial of labor, could have a uterine rupture. But of that 0.4%, only 6% of those are catastrophic. So catastrophic is the worst thing we can imagine. That's where the baby has a demise. And it's horrible. It's an awful, awful thing. But 6% of 0.4% is a very small number. And there are many things that can help avoid that. And sometimes it is an unavoidable process of labor. But it's also important to understand that women have ruptures of their uterus when they have never had a cesarean scar. And most people don't know that happens too. So this care provider will also work in a group with an on-call schedule, but either all the providers are equally supportive, or that care provider will attend your birth, whether they're on call or not. We call that kind of the special. Not all care providers will do that. Not all are able to do that. Some groups are not set up like that. Some care providers practice singly. So they are the only provider in their practice, and which is kind of a unicorn. It's kind of hard to find, but there are a few out there. And if you have a care provider like that, you know they're going to be there for your birth. So those are some of the ways to find that tolerant versus supportive.
A couple of questions come to mind. Is there a particular hospital? I don't know if we can say this or not. I don't want to put you on the spot, but is there a particular agency, provider, hospital, birthing center, so on and so forth, that you would say are VBAC friendly?
That's a great question. The first thing is we have a great birthing center here in Central Indiana, Sacred Roots, but by Indiana law, they're not allowed to take women who are having a VBAC. So birthing center is out in Indiana. Home birth is a possibility. We have many, or several, I wish we had many, but we have several home birth midwives in our area. And they, most of them, if a woman is low risk, are willing to have a home VBAC, which is possible. And as far as the hospitals go, one really exciting thing in Indianapolis recently is we have gotten 2 new practices with midwives in the hospital. And so at Community North Hospital and at Methodist, IU Methodist Hospital, there are practices of midwives. They are able to take VBAC patients. And so you can get midwifery care in a hospital, which is a benefit, I believe. And so both of those hospitals are VBAC supportive. IU North Hospital in Carmel is very VBAC supportive. I've had VBACs occur at really just about every hospital in the city. Some are more supportive than others. But those are the ones that I probably go to the most for women with a VBAC.
Awesome, thank you. Such good information. You refer to a doula as being part of your care when considering a VBAC. What can a doula do to help an expecting mama who is considering a VBAC?
Well, another great question. So as a doula, I'm a support person. I'm not medical, so I'm not there to evaluate your health, to prescribe, to take the place of a nurse, a doctor, a midwife. I'm there for support and a number of ways of support: physical support, educational, emotional support, partner support, advocacy. Those are all ways that a doula supports, and many, many other things. But my support starts in the pregnancy. And so many people, when they think about a doula, they think about just having someone with them when they have their baby. And that's great. It's a wonderful part of the process. But really, my support starts much earlier. And so I love it when a woman is very proactive and she's looking for a doula early in her pregnancy. So I would say most people, most women who are pregnant don't get super serious about the fact that they have to birth that baby until they're in the 3rd trimester. So I get a lot of calls from women who are mid-pregnancy to the beginning of the 3rd trimester. So 20 weeks to maybe 26, 28, 30, sometimes more weeks. And that's when I hear from women a lot. But I love it when I hear from women that are very proactive and they're, 6 or 8 weeks pregnant, and they're looking at their options for their plans, because that gives us so much more time to work together. So as a doula in that pregnancy time, I'm a resource. I've been around for a long time. I've been attending births for 24 years. I've been certified and trained for 16. I've done about 460 some births. So I've got a lot of experience, but I've also got a lot of resources, and I'm always learning new ones. I'm always learning new things because there's just great stuff all out there, and I'm always just getting introduced to new things. Like what you do, Jocelyn, was new to me this year. So that's awesome. Awesome. Um, so I want to make sure that my clients have the resources that they need to find information, to get good classes, to get educated well. I also do education as a doula, so we do childbirth, individual one-on-one childbirth education together, but I also am very, very excited about getting more education outside of what I do, because I think there is more out there to get. So guiding people to find those resources for education. Sometimes when people hire me, even if it's later in the pregnancy, sometimes, as we talk, we discover that they don't feel that their caregiver is VBAC supportive. And they don't really understand that until we start talking. And so I've had a number of cases where a woman decides to switch care providers. And I've had that happen anywhere from early pregnancy. I've got someone right now that is early pregnancy. They've only had one meeting, but they're already considering that they just didn't feel comfortable. And then all the way up to, I had a client switch at 39 weeks. Another care provider. And this was during the COVID time because her hospital was not allowing doulas. And she was a first-time mom, and she felt like she needed that in-person support. So she made a switch to a hospital with a midwife in a hospital setting where I could be with her. And so sometimes people will switch their caregivers. I'm not trying to talk them into that, but I'm just trying to help them understand if their caregiver is supportive and if they feel comfortable and confident with that caregiver. We can work with anything. It's going to be an uphill battle sometimes.
Sure. Wow, that's fantastic. So you mentioned resources. You have lots of resources that you have gleaned from over the years. I love the fact that you continue to educate yourself and keep yourself abreast to what is necessary, what is modern, what is needed now, today. The world is changing around us so quickly. I mean, this year is a testament to that. I mean, so many changes this year. And so with all these resources that you have gathered and the new information that you've gathered, what resources are available and how do we access those resources?
Well, my new favorite resource is called the VBAC link. And I'm going to sound like a commercial for them because I just love the VBAC link. So the VBAC link is two doulas from Utah, and they both had VBACs themselves. They actually had HBAC, which is a home birth after cesarean. Both of them had that. And as doulas, they really started to want to help women have VBACs in their area in Utah. So they started helping women have VBACs. And then they started a website called the VBAC link. They started doing a podcast where women just told their birth story. And they tell the story of their C-section birth or births, and then their VBAC birth. And so one of my clients was on the show, one of the very early segments. So now they've got over 100 birth stories, but my client was number 9. And she was a home birth transfer to the hospital VBAC. And so it was a great story and about transfer care and what that looks like. And so my client was that number 9 story. Well, that's where I became interested in the VBAC link. So they have this podcast, and they release a podcast every Wednesday. And I find that my clients get really, really excited when they listen to these birth stories and how women went through the issues they went through with their cesarean, how they overcame those, how they made new plans, and then somehow times how they changed their plans in the middle to have a success. And then sometimes their shows are a repeat C-section. And so that just shows when it becomes necessary and what that looks like and how that can actually be a positive experience for them because they were still in the driver's seat. They were still calling the shots. They were still able to say yes or no to what they wanted. So they have a podcast, they have several different things that they offer, but they also have a Facebook page. So the VBAC link community, which a woman can join. And you also see a lot of women that just had their vaginal birth. They're excited and they're on there. So that's one great. There's VBAC.com, VBACfacts.com is another great one. Childbirthconnection.org has a lot of stats and statistics about VBAC. And then the other one I love is ICAN, ICAN, International Cesarean Awareness Network. And they have a national website, but they also have a Facebook page for our local area, which is called ICAN of Greater Indianapolis. If anybody wants to join that, there's a lot of support and encouragement and a lot of sharing of information like, well, what doctor would you recommend in this area? And did you find this doctor supportive, encouraging? And so there's a lot of specific information that's shared on there to help women plan in this area. So those are some of my favorite ones. Also, the VBAC link has a online course called How to VBAC, the Ultimate Prep. And they have an advanced VBAC doula certification, which I've not done yet, but it's on my list.
That's awesome. Awesome. Thank you for sharing those with us. And I believe you have this resource list and we're going to email it out or send it out or post it somewhere. Is that what?
Right. We can post it either with the video or you send it if you have those email addresses. We could do that. I have a resource list.
If you want that resource video, I would encourage you to email me at let's see, I'll put my email here, jwilliams@nsibrain.com, and we'll get that to you, okay? So you can either email me or you can just put your email here in the chat room. You can also email it to me privately if you don't want that made public. And so thank you so much for sharing about VBAC and TOLAC. I want to encourage those of you who are on with us tonight. Part of our agenda tonight is to talk, it was to have Julie, and then I'm going to talk a little bit about neurodevelopmental movement. And then after I speak about neurodevelopmental movement, we're going to have a Q&A session. And so this is a great time for you to go ahead and type in your questions in the chat box, and then we'll address those questions. So, Julie, another question here. Last question for me at the moment. Neurodevelopmental movement, where does that fit in? Why are we going to talk about that tonight?
Well, I think women that pursue a TOLAC, that want to be back, they want the very best. They want the best for their body. They want the best for their baby. And maybe they felt like that maybe they didn't get that with their first or their second birth. And so they're really searching, they're really looking, they want to do the best they can for their child. And there's so many reasons that vaginal birth gives your baby a great start over cesarean birth. It really is neurologically and physically and immunology wise, if that's a word, gives them such a great start. But also after birth, there's so many things we can do to help give our babies a good start in life. And so I met Jocelyn this past year, and she became a member of the Indy Birth Alliance, and she was one of our first members that wasn't a doula. And so it was interesting because we're kind of inviting in some other people that do other things in the birth community. And so she just has kind of jived with what we do, because she just kind of takes on after we have a baby and goes forward. So she is a developmental movement consultant. And she loves babies. You can see that when she's got a baby around her, she like lights up and just like stars shoot out of her eyes. I don't know. She just loves it. But she teaches about the infant developmental sequence, and that this is new. This was new to me. I was really learning about this. Her business is called Neurolly, and she's going to tell you a little bit about that while you type in your questions and comments or any thoughts that you have for me to answer at the end of our time.
Awesome, thank you. It has been a privilege to get to know the IBA and Julie and Tess and Sally and many others. And you're right, we have been a great fit because you guys help birth these beautiful babies and provide that support to mama. And then I get to support mama after she goes through that postpartum and kind of help her walk through that first year of life with her brand new baby. And so I'm going to take just a brief minute, just about 5 minutes, to talk to you, to do a little presentation about the infant developmental sequence. And so again, you can type your questions, and if you are going to type questions while I do the presentation, just please direct them to everyone, because it's kind of hard to find private questions. And it just makes it smoother if the questions are directed to everyone. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here with you. And so let's just make sure you can see that. Okay. All right, can everyone see the screen? Give me a nod if you can see it. Fantastic, and you can still hear me, correct? Awesome, technology is working for us tonight, ladies, even though there's a storm outside. Okay, so as Julie already mentioned, I am Jocelyn Williams. I am the founder and director of Neurolly Solutions, also known as Neurolly. And so at Neurolly, we provide a movement-based educational approach to equipping the infant baby's brain for life, okay? Our goal is to equip the brain for life. And so let's go ahead and dive into that now. The work of Neurolly is based on the infant developmental sequence. And the infant developmental sequence is what every human infant was designed to go through. It is a very simple process. And this process helps to shore up the foundational levels of the brain. This part of the brain is responsible for all of our automatic functions. Things such as bonding, emotional regulation, focus, sensory processing, and so much more. Now, this process, okay, is really as simple as A, B, and C. But here's what's so important is that the infants need to go through this process before they start walking, okay, before they start walking. So what is it? Let's dive in. First of all, A, okay? From birth, infants need to be on their tummies approximately 50% of a 24-hour period. We call this tummy all the time. And so the A represents all, tummy all the time. The tummy should be the baby's default position. Baby's up in arms for things like feeding time, bathing time, comforting, snuggling, and then when you're done, back down on the belly, okay? So tummy all the time. The next part is B. B, okay, represents tummy crawling. Tummy all the time leads into tummy crawling, which includes the belly button. So the B represents belly button, the belly button being flat on the ground and the baby moving forward, okay? This form of movement is so similar to an army crawl, okay? And many of our babies are missing this vital part of their developmental sequence, okay? But it's so important that they go through this process because this process helps them to integrate their reflexes. And if the reflexes are not integrated when they're older, they become stumbling blocks. So for example, if you have a baby, when a baby's first born, they should startle. You make a loud noise, baby's gonna startle automatically. If that reflex isn't integrated later on in life, one simple example of how that could be a stumbling block is a 5-year-old who is petrified of the vacuum cleaner, or you know, a dog is barking in there. They're holding their ears and they're so afraid because that reflex wasn't integrated. The developmental sequence integrates the reflexes, okay? Let's move on to C. At approximately 6 to 12 months, babies need an ample amount of time to creep on their hands and knees. Now notice the position of the baby. The baby is up on all fours and the belly button is no longer touching on the ground. So C is for creeping, creeping on hands and knees. And again, the baby should continue creeping until their creep has developed into an efficient cross-lateral movement. For example, a baby should not be scooting on their bottom to get from one place to the other. They should not be rolling around from one place to the other. They should not be creeping with one leg straight and one leg bent. It should be an efficient cross-lateral movement, okay? Now, when an infant engages in the developmental sequence, they are given equal access and opportunity to be equipped for life. And here are some examples. One, a baby who is well bonded, okay, especially with their primary caretaker. This is so important. That first bonding experience with their primary caretaker sets them up for emotional success later on in life in so many ways. Two, a child who is socially and emotionally equipped to have healthy peer interactions. Or three, a student who's able to learn well. And four, an adult who has the strength needed to make a global impact. The developmental sequence for infants, as I said, is as simple as A, B, and C. But remember, this must take place before the baby starts walking. Why? Because when given the opportunity to go through their developmental sequence, the impact is profound. Now, the developmental sequence, something important to note is that it is not a man-made program. This is a process that was designed for each and every human infant to go through. So I love that because this isn't something that I'm making up. This is something that babies simply need. At Neurolly, we work with infants, with children, with students, and even adults. And our process is super simple, okay? We set up an assessment with the developmental movement consultant, the baby, and the primary caretaker. Because of COVID, we can do this assessment either in person or via video, okay? The next step is training. The developmental consultant is going to review the results of the assessment with the primary caretaker and provide training in the elements of the developmental sequence that his or her baby needs. And then finally, the primary caretaker is going to be given a daily movement plan and support protocols to ensure that their baby has had that equal access and opportunity to complete his or her infant developmental sequence. Now, in an ideal world, all babies will go through the developmental sequence, right? Well, we know that that's not the case. But there is super good news, okay? For older children, for students and adults, we can actually replicate the developmental sequence. And this is known as neurodevelopmental movement. And neurodevelopmental movement is based on neuroplasticity. So when given the right triggers, the brain is able to change. In other words, there is hope, there is a second chance. Okay, For more information, you can contact me, Jocelyn Williams. My phone number is listed here. It's 317-936-6797, or you can email me at jwilliams@nsibrain.com. And of course, you can find me on social media at Neurolly Solutions. If there's one thing that, just one little golden nugget I can leave with you today, babies need lots of movement. Give them an opportunity to be on their tummies. Give them an opportunity to go through their infant developmental sequence. You're not going to regret it. And if for some reason your baby doesn't want to be in their tummy, get in contact with myself or your doula. Doulas that specialize in tummy time, and we will be sure to help your baby get that tummy time that they need. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, okay? And I'm going to come back over to you. And let's see, I need to put my video back on. All right. All righty. So, Julie, it looks like you've done a great job answering all of everyone's questions. And so it doesn't look like we have a whole lot of questions right at the moment. Is there any golden nugget that you want to leave us with tonight before we wrap up?
Well, I was kind of thinking through of maybe what I didn't share that could be helpful. And that is, who is this appropriate for? Who is appropriate for a TOLAC, a trial of labor? And ACOG says that any woman who has had 1 or 2 low transverse, which is a low horizontal cesarean surgery, can be a candidate for a TOLAC. Also, a woman who has had 1 or even 2 cesareans and is carrying twins can be a candidate for a TOLAC. Also, women with special scars may be candidates, but there's not a lot of research. So a special scar is like a T scar where there's a cut low and then a vertical cut, or a J cut, sometimes that comes up from the bottom and up. One scar that's not appropriate for TOLAC is a high uterine scar, and that's, for instance, if someone has a cesarean for a very premature baby, they would have a scar up high on their tummy where their uterus is then, instead of down low. So that's one time when it's not appropriate. It's appropriate for women who are advanced maternal age, older than 35. It's appropriate for women that have some even medical conditions, like if they have gestational diabetes, it can still be appropriate to consider a TOLAC. So there are a lot of women that really can consider this. But the sad news is only 13% of the potential births that could be TOLAC end up being a TOLAC. So 67% are repeat C-sections, and only 13% are VBAC, or not even VBAC, but are TOLAC. They try to have a vaginal birth. So there are a lot of women out there that just aren't trying, and a large number of those don't know that they have any other options. Some women truly would choose additional C-section, and that's their choice. I totally understand that. There are some reasons why that can work better for some people, as far as being able to time their birth, pick a date, have their doctor, and have a planned situation. So I understand that. But there are so many women that could have this option that don't even know that it's an option. They have a caregiver that never, ever brings it up. They just say when they come in at 8 weeks or 10 weeks, well, let's go ahead and schedule your C-section date. And honestly, they go ahead and schedule a C-section date because they don't know anything else. So part of what I really would leave as the golden nugget is, let's just share that information, that this is possible. It doesn't mean you have to or you have to feel pressure, but there are many reasons why it's healthier for your baby, it's healthier for you to pursue that TOLAC, especially if you want to have a larger family. And that's one reason to really keep it in mind, because being able to have a vaginal birth leaves the doors open for as many babies as you desire to have. Not everyone desires a large family, and many people are happy with 2 children, and that's or 3 children. That's great. But I meet women who really do desire a larger family, and if they continue to have C-sections, their mode of birth will control how many children they can bring into the world. And that makes me really sad for them and their family. So I just really like to share that with women so that they keep their options open. And so that's what I do.
Thank you. Well, I have one more question for you. But before I ask that question, I want to share with everyone on tonight that next week we will continue our Indy Birth Alliance education series. And our next guest speaker is Hava Hull. And Hava is a fertility care practitioner, birth doula, and postpartum support advocate. She helps women become confident and empowered through fertility education and support throughout their pregnancy, birth, and postpartum journey. And so if you're interested in this topic or know someone who is, we want to encourage you to join our series next week at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, next Monday night, 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And the link is located in the chat box. So you'll find the link there in the chat box. And if you're listening to this on recording, you can go to Eventbrite, okay? Go to Eventbrite and look up Indy Birth Alliance Education Series, and you will find the link there to register for our next event. Okay, so back to you, Julie. We're gonna, this will be our last question for tonight, and then we're gonna wrap it up. And so what if I'm a first-time expecting mom? Is there anything that I can do to help reduce the chance that I would have a C-section and that I would need a VBAC later on? Anything that I can do about that?
Sure, that's a great question, because one of my real heart desires is to help women avoid the primary C-section. Because if we don't have the primary C-section, there's no need for a VBAC.
For a VBAC, right.
And so it's really similar to the advice I shared earlier, but a caregiver and a birthplace that is supportive of vaginal birth is really important. So looking up your hospital's C-section rate is one thing that you can do. You can also look at reviews or talk to other women in Facebook groups or different chance opportunities for that about your caregiver and what kind of care that they got from them. So that's another big one. Having a doula, of course, I think that's a huge one. And unfortunately, a lot of first-time moms don't know that any such a thing exists. So I think that can really help them, though, because we can help a lot with resources and education. And then really just believing in their body and their ability to birth their baby. Our culture is a culture of fear around childbirth. And I really try to help women to have joy and excitement about birthing their baby instead of fear and being consumed with what can go wrong. Instead, planning for what they can do to help things go right and taking care of themselves, their bodies, having supportive people around them, and having a positive attitude makes a huge difference. So that's what I would say.
That's awesome. Thank you so much for being our guest speaker tonight, Julie. We've learned so much from you about TOLAC and VBAC. And we're getting thank yous here in our chat box. So we just want to say thank you again. And thank you to you, our participants, for joining us this evening. We're so glad that you were here. We're so proud of you. I mean, you are investing your time and your energy, whether it be for professional development or for your own personal development and preparation for your next birth. And so we are just so proud of you. We honor you. We want to let you know that you are doing the most important job on the planet Earth. Carrying a baby and raising a child is the absolute most important job. And so we just applaud you and thank you for being with us tonight. Again, you can register by following the link. And until next week, have a great night, everybody. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.